Rising is for organizations that are growing but quietly losing clarity along the way. Revenue may be up, hiring may be strong, yet decisions take longer, collaboration feels harder, and leaders are exhausted trying to keep everything aligned. The pressure is to push harder, launch another initiative, implement another tool, demand more output. But intensity cannot compensate for misalignment, and effort cannot fix what leaders cannot clearly see. Rather than offering another leadership program, Rising provides a practical blueprint for building a people system that develops leaders at every level and restores alignment across your organization.
This is the Leaders Rising podcast, creating bigger futures, building thriving cultures. We believe you can become a leader worth following.
There is a kind of leadership story that rarely gets told cleanly. Not the turnaround story with a clear villain and a decisive hero, not the scaling story where every decision lands right, but the story of someone who stepped into something uncertain, didn't fully understand what they were doing, and still built something real anyway. That's the story I'm going to share in this episode. It was recorded live as part of our Rising book launch event, and I'll be honest with you, it's one of the more vulnerable things I've put into words publicly. Because the early days of that role weren't pretty, and the system we eventually built did not come from a plan. It came from necessity. It came from people who refused to let me figure it out alone. Dr. Tom Nebel will follow with something equally valuable, a clear-eyed look at the tensions that don't go away, even when your systems are working. Leaders being pushed into roles they didn't choose, the line between support and challenge, and what it actually looks like when a leader stops the meeting, tells the truth, and something shifts. Jeff and I and the Leaders Rising Network team wrote Rising on the basis, the idea that organizations do not rise because of heroic moments or lofty goals alone. They rise because of intentional systems built by leaders who are willing to see clearly and develop the people around them on purpose. This episode is where that idea becomes a story you can see yourself in. I want to tell you a story about starting my dream job. I was so excited on day one. I had been looking forward to this job for years and years and years. I was really excited, motivated, and energized. And I stepped into that role, and I walked into a conference room for our first big team meeting, and then I worried. Then I worried about how we were actually ever going to accomplish anything we had ever done because we no longer had the leaders in the room. That was a challenge. It was a crisis in the moment. And I was scared. I was worried. I had no idea how we were ever going to do this. That first year in the new role was very, very slow. But I did have people around me who supported and encouraged me. Going all the way back to the beginning of my career, I had people who had spoken into my life, who had encouraged me, supported me. They helped me build a foundation, even in this new role, even when things were hard. I want you for a minute to bring the name to mind, a name, a picture, a face of a leader who had a particular influence on you, somebody who invested in you, spent time developing you. Bring their name to mind and drop it in the chat as you think about it. We'd love to see these names. I have names like Anna, Tom, Jacob. All of them had a significant role in shaping me to be who I was, even in stepping into that role and beyond. Now, it wasn't all bad news, and it didn't stay bad news forever. From year 1 to year 5, this organization's impact, we grew 25 times over those 5 years. But it still wasn't easy. And what I didn't realize at the time in those early days was that we weren't just filling leadership gaps. We weren't just filling empty seats around a boardroom table. We were building a system. So what does a system actually look like? Oftentimes, organizations look at the system as a whole, the organization, the big picture, how we're structured, how we're organized, and where we are headed. Back to my story, it would have been really easy for us to set a new vision, try to get everyone excited, and pursue that organizational clarity. But clarity doesn't begin at the organizational level. Clarity begins with us. As Jeff gave us a few minutes ago, one of my favorite quotes, the tool that we use, the phrase we use, I first heard this from my very first supervisor in my first full-time role. What's it like to be on the other side of you? That's the foundation of self-clarity, truly understanding your gifts, talents, abilities, as well as your shadow side, your gaps. It's not a bad thing to have gaps. None of us are perfect. If we can be honest about it, we can build a new pathway and grow and develop, become more well-rounded every day. From self-clarity, we move to team dynamics. You put together those personalities, those tendencies, those communication styles of everyone on your team, and you get a team that each has different gifts and abilities. You can watch each other's back. You can fill each other's gaps and collaborate on those gaps rather than highlighting, rather than them indicting somebody for something that they've done wrong. It allows us to build a stronger team. Then we can build the organizational system. In that experience I had stepping into this new role in year one, I didn't know a lot about myself at the time, but I did know one thing. I couldn't do this all alone. By year two, we started to build some individual teams, and by year three, we were able to build a stronger picture of the organization as a whole. But you can't fix things that you can't see. Once you have clarity about all of this, you need infrastructure. You need, as Steve mentioned, the entire operating system for your organization. And many times, we only look at a piece or a part of the whole. Here's how we approach this. Your organizational identity, the core of who you are, is at the center of this diagram. Your organizational identity starts with your vision, your mission, your values. Just yesterday, I was at a great organization that has values on the wall, but the values aren't just on the wall. They're on table tents, on the conference room table. They're on small cards on every desk around the office. And they talk about them. Values are important, and they are an integral part of our everyday. The next ring outside of our core identity are our goals, our rhythms, and our people. You set goals, short-term, near-term, and long-term. How do you focus? How do you prioritize those goals? Clarity around that is really important for your organization in setting those goals. And then your rhythms need to reinforce that. When we say rhythms, really we mean meetings, having the right meetings. But we've all been in bad meetings or meetings that should have been an email. We want to have strong, reinforcing meetings that keep us on a path towards achieving our goals. And the third component of this ring is our people. This is self-clarity and team clarity lived out, giving each person a pathway towards growth and development of their skills, their talents and abilities, their growing edges. A few days ago, I heard a story about a team that was given an opportunity at an offsite to learn how to juggle because they wanted their team to understand what it felt like, again, to not be the expert at everything. I'll come back to that story in a minute with our next tool. I'll be honest, in this organization, when I started this role, finance and HR were running counter to us. It often felt like we were focused so much on the core identity of the organization, developing leaders, building teams, but finance and HR were fighting us at every turn. The systems in your organization, IT, HR, finance, should all be reinforcing the goals, the people development, and the rhythms that you have. We all need to be speaking the same language and marching in the same direction. By year three in my role, we didn't just look the part. We had the leaders, the resources, and the system to back it up. Here's how we did it. These two tools, the next two tools, were a core part of how we developed leaders. This growth pathway symbolizes the pathway that every leader travels. It's very predictable. That story of learning how to juggle highlights the journey that we take in developing skills. These leaders at their offsite learned how to juggle to remember what it was like to be at stage one, to be excited about a new opportunity and possibility. That's how I felt on day one. That's how every one of these leaders felt when they stepped into a new leadership role. Excitement, passion, possibility. But overwhelm comes quickly when you start to realize just how much information it is and just how long it might take you. And you start to wonder, can I ever reach confidence? Can I ever reach a stable footing? Or am I simply going to be spinning my wheels? In this state of overwhelm, there are two possible next steps. One we call the trap door. The trap door is standing right there. If you become so overwhelmed and so worried and beat yourself up and don't have the people around you to support you, encourage you, and equip you, things are not going to go well. People end up quitting. They quit on themselves, they quit on the job, they quit on development, and go right back to where they started. But for leaders, you have an opportunity to build a bridge, to give someone the resources, the time, lean in, answer questions, give them space to learn, develop, and cultivate these new skills on their growth pathway. Once they get to a place of confidence, they've seen a lot. They know how to handle many situations. They can't handle it all. We had one construction client who walked us through the process of apprenticeship, and they said a roofing apprentice learns a lot within the first few months. They see some of the basics and they do it repeatedly. But it's not until the end of year 2 that they've really seen all of the nuances, the differences, the strange moments where if you've never seen this before, you don't know how to solve this problem. Leaders who are developing on this growth pathway need you to lean in. They need you to support them, equip them, and encourage them so that they get to this place of maturity. But maturity is not the end of the road. We see this often, and you may feel this in a way, that that leader, that name you thought of earlier, cultivated you and developed you into some of who you are. Here's my encouragement for you today. Becoming mature, becoming an expert in something is not the end of the journey. I want to encourage you to invest in someone else. We call this the multiplier phase, where now you can coach someone else and you invest what you've learned, what you've cultivated in yourself, and you are now equipped to cultivate that in someone else. As we move towards world class, we see that every leader is at a different level on this chart, in a variety of skills. In Rising, we talk about leaders who are world class at one thing, intermediate at something else, and beginner at yet another. That's very natural. We can't all be experts and world class at everything. But hopefully you see how world class and the growth pathway fit together, allowing us to build a growth journey for our leaders to develop skills and abilities and become the leaders the world needs them to be. In our organization, when our leaders got to professional and world class, when they got to that 4th and 5th stage of the growth pathway, they were part of our world-class system that we were building. When I knew this was all working, there was a moment. We had set a goal, we had cast a vision, we had developed and trained a team and some new leaders, but we had trained them on a hypothetical situation. We didn't know if it was real, but we believed it was. The very first time this team was sent out to deliver, they encountered someone. And the very first person they encountered said, "Thank you so much for what you're doing. This is exactly what I needed." What's interesting is that person, their story, their experience, the need that our team was able to meet solved a problem that was the very problem our hypothetical vision and goal had set out to accomplish. We saw it coming to life. And that's part of the beauty of seeing these pieces come together. We wrote Rising because we believe organizations don't rise because of heroic leaders or lofty goals alone. We believe you need a process. You need to develop and cultivate those around you. Build strengths, talents, and abilities in your team and move them in a process towards world class. Organizations don't rise because of heroes. They rise because of intentional systems. And we wrote Rising to give you the tools to build your own intentional system. That journey from year 1 to year 5, from near crisis to a team that could deliver on a vision that wasn't yet proven, is a case study in what happens when clarity and infrastructure compound over time. The work was not dramatic, but it was consistent. Tom picks up from there with something that complements that story: the tensions that show up in every organization, regardless of how well built the system is. Because even the best operating system gets tested by people who did not choose to lead, by cultures that confuse being nice with being good, and by the moments that demand honesty from the top.
Aaron, as you were sharing just a bit ago about people starting out really at beginners and then working toward world class, I, I, uh, I was reminded as you were talking about a construction organization that we've worked with, another situation when I was in a construction space, and it was with an electrical workers union. And when I was working with this particular group, we were talking about the realities of leadership these days. And they were talking actually about the frustration of new leaders coming in or being, or new, let's just say, apprenticeship or journeyman becoming leaders faster than they ever imagined they would. And some actually being reluctant and rejecting of the mantle of leadership. So I'm thinking of that as I just have a couple of reflections as Courtney invited me, just on the state of leadership these days and what we see to be true. It has to do with just the tensions of how much do we lead, how much do we follow, where are we thrust into situations where we don't want to lead, but we must lead, and what are the realities when we are, let's just say, giving oversight to an organization that needs more leaders. So I'm just going to state a few things. First of all, it is a reality that leaders are being baked a lot faster these days than ever before, and a lot of people are thrust into leadership roles that they honestly never signed up for. I know in the electrical trade, it used to be 4 years for an apprentice to become a journeyman. Now it's closer to 3. Then it's interesting too with the new journeymen. They're out there doing the work they wanted to do with their hands and make things get done. And then next thing you know, there are things that they have to encounter where they find themselves leading or they're assigned a leadership role and they're not enjoying that. So that's a current tension that we're experiencing in this day and era. And we see it across the spectrum of organizations that we work with. I wouldn't doubt, and you're free to drop it into the chat. Well, here's an organization that I know of, right, where, wow, a leader, they've had to push people into leadership positions faster than ever before. Or maybe even your own story. You could just say, happened to me, and it happened, when I was a rookie at such and such. Okay, so that's a tension, and we need to overcome that because it is a reality more than a problem these days that people are stuck in leadership roles, not always wanting what's just been handed to them. Okay, so that's a tension. I'm going to mention a second tension that we need to reckon ourselves with as we are looking really at the spectrum of organizational health and getting our work done. But there's a tension these days, and it is a cultural question. And we realize it. What do they say? The current generation, that there is a tension between being nice, meaning, hey, we have to have the right culture, as is described, let's just say, by free soda pop in the kitchen, or meals that are served, or working remotely, or any sort of accommodation about being nice. Okay, I'm calling it that for a reason, and actually, there's an acronym that I've used behind it. But nice sometimes means nothing inside me cares enough. But there's a tension there too with being nice because we need to. We're told we need to. We know flight risks are always there for people that we've trained up or raised up, and if we're not nice enough, they could bolt. But there is a tension because we got to get stuff done. So on the spectrum of being nice, where do we slide away, or where do we bring in the component where it has more to do with applying pressure and getting things done? Now, this can turn into a visual, which we're not going in today, but we call it support and challenge. And the question is, do we bring support, meaning high support, low support? How are we doing with that in terms of the people we lead? High support might be nice. It might be um, it might be equipment that works. It could be just a whole host of things. All right, but what about that support piece? How strong are we doing there? But there's that tension with the challenge piece. Challenge means, can we apply pressure? Can we bring change? Right there inside the word challenge is the word change. But can we take a normal and make it a better normal? All right. Now, we all know the best leaders, the ones that you think about, the ones that really internally we aspire to be, are those that can both bring support, meaning be nice, be human. We're in this together. Let's get things done in a way that magnifies humanity, but also the idea of challenge. Can we do things in ways that means that there's better horizons for us individually as leaders, for the organization, for our mission and what we're bringing to the world? So that's the second tension, not just having to bake leaders sooner than later, but then also how do we balance that support dynamic with the challenge dynamic? And there is a way it can be done. I want to bring that encouragement. But then also, I just want to mention, just to personify how this stuff really works. So I've had the privilege to work with a lot of different organizations, and one that I'm thinking right now in my state of Wisconsin. It's a well-known and strong bank. It's east centrally located. They've got about 35 branches or so. And they are, like a lot of organizations, part of a merger and acquisition. Now, not just that, but banks these days to survive are often acquiring other branches. So mergering and acquisitioning is happening all the time. That always creates opportunity. It also creates tension when you or your employees think, oh, we're on the side of being acquired right now. So those are realities, but I want to tell you about this particular bank as we land the story. Early on, they became a client of ours, and when we did, after this one major merger of theirs, they said, "Oh, why weren't you here just a few years ago?" Wow, that's where all the tension really rose to the top, bringing in an organization of about 20 branches with another organization of about 10 branches, and there was a lot of mayhem, there was distrust, there was you, me, everything else around it. But they have not only survived, they have thrived because they started to do the things that we're talking about here, meaning invest in the people, invest in knowing what it's like to be on the other side of ourselves, looking at people, here's a banking term, as assets, not liabilities. And have they thrived? It's a process of getting internal language, being able to say things clearly, not beating around the bush, at being human, and all of that. And I'm going to just reflect on one moment about that bank that I'm describing, and then I'll hand it back to Central Command here. But it was a call that I was doing with their senior leadership team. It was done virtually. I remember where I was on the West Coast, and they had all their people on this meeting. And I was going through some of the things that we do here in Leaders Rising Network, and I was advancing the conversation there. And what happened was, as I moved from one topic to the next, I was interrupted by the bank president, and he just put the brakes on this moment. Now, if you're a consultant, like we are, if you're consultants, you're like, oh, nay, what just happened? Did the trap door just show up, or what went wrong here? Oh, it's all those things. But instead, this bank president, he brought honest humility into the conversation. And he stopped everything. He said, "Can you go back to that slide?" He said, "I've been doing some soul searching in this moment, and I realized how I have undermined several of you on this team and how I have not been at my best. And I'm realizing you had the right idea. I didn't have the right idea. You were the right person for the job. I was discounting you, if not externally, internally, and I want to apologize right now to make this thing better." It was an epic moment. We get to see a lot of epic moments. And I'm saying when we can balance these tensions that we are describing right now, we really do have a chance to rise.
The bank president who stopped the meeting, who named what he had done wrong and apologized in front of his whole senior team, that is not a management technique. That is what it looks like when someone leads with honest humility. And it's probably the clearest example across all 3 episodes of what rising is ultimately about. It's not a program, it's not a framework, it's not a workshop, but it's about a leader who can see clearly, build intentionally, and stay human under pressure. If any of this conversation over this series sparked something for you, the book is a great next step. Not because it sells you on a system, because it gives you the language for things you've probably already seen and felt. And language is usually where clarity begins.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Leaders Rising Network podcast. Connect with us on LinkedIn or visit online at leadersrisingnetwork.com.